Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Sara Gon. Sara, how are you doing?
No, fine. Good, thanks.
And joining us, I think, for the first time as a sort of regular contributor and not simply as a guest, is Gerbrandt van Heerden. Gerry, how are you doing?
Hi, Nicholas. It's great to be back, and I'm excited to be a regular on the show. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to have you.
Me.
And your insights into the many problems that plague our fair nation. Speaking of which, I think we should probably start off with the big one, which continues, of course, to be in the news. I saw our overlords at Eskom decided to gift us with stage 5 and 6 in the last sort of 24 hours, which is always a delight, which is why I'm surprised that I have power while recording this episode, but that's another here on there. So we talked a little bit yesterday about the ANC moving towards declaring a state of disaster for the country, which it says will help it to solve the Eskom crisis within 12 months, which seems to be the new government line. Vikile Mbalula, the Secretary General of the ANC, said that the ANC believed a declaration of a state of disaster would help end load shedding sooner. He said, a state of disaster will help us to move with speed. The target of getting this done this year can be met. Procurement will be faster and resources for interventions, particularly for maintenance, made available. For a long time, we have been told something that is elusive. The reports have been contradictory. Our response to COVID was scientifically driven. Our response to load shedding must be scientifically driven. So in the reporting on this, News 24 seems to have boiled down the ANC's load shedding recovery plan to 8 points. So let me just read those points out. Prioritization of maintenance, management, and the security of Eskom power plants. Management of load shedding such that it minimizes the impact on the economy and the provision of basic services, including water. Mitigation of the decisions by the National Energy Regulator of South Africa regarding Eskom tariffs on people and the economy, and implementing measures to manage electricity demand, including installing solar panel heaters and other energy efficient systems. So let's start with those 4. There's another 4 to come afterwards. But Sara, what do you make of this plan? The thing that really strikes me is that a lot of this is things that have already been done or should have already been done, at least in these first 4.
Well, let's put it this way. It's suitably vague, and it's kind of, well, let's do what we should have done, but faster. Or let's do what we never did, but faster. I'm not quite sure what the government thinks a state of disaster is going to do. I mean, obviously it'll allow them to apply for funding that will from other parts of other departments, and Treasury will be obliged to provide whatever they need. But it's such a funny thing, because here they desperately want to do something urgently, and one of the biggest problems is the red tape for purchasing anything that needs to be done urgently. And of course, the other thing, and I don't know if it's mentioned in more detail, is the fact that Eskom has been subject to local content provisions by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, and anything urgent that would have to come in to repair anything would have to come from overseas anyway. I'm just not sure I quite understand why the government and Eskom, because Eskom is responsible for the actual work, just can't do things more urgently. But if you're not going to do the right things, I suppose it doesn't really matter what you do urgently or what you don't do. And nowhere, I think, in that list was mentioned dragooning the necessary skills from the private sector, which is probably the one urgent thing we need more than anything else.
Or being specific about what precisely the procurement barriers here are. And things like BEE and things like localization are some of the biggest barriers to procurement, because it means that you have to select who you do business with on the basis of either race or location, which of course is going to limit the options you have and slow down supply. But that's not mentioned at all in any of these plans as a thing to go. Also on this point of reducing the usage in the grid, as far as I understand, back in 2008 when load shedding started, Eskom actually sold 25,000 megawatts, I think, of power. Sorry, I think it's megawatts of power more than it does now. So we have actually reduced significantly the amount of electricity we use as a country, despite the fact that the economy is a little bit bigger than it was then. And yet, Eskom's ability to produce electricity has deteriorated at such a rate that despite the reductions, it still isn't able to keep track. So let me read the next four and get your input on these, Gerbrandt. Expediting of the procurement of emergency power, which seems to be, I think, the big one in here. Relief and support to poor households as well as small and medium enterprises. Curb the outward migration of technical and management skills and capabilities at Eskom while mobilizing additional skills, such as in engineering. But we've heard this before. And 8 is the support of the just energy transition as a long-term program. So the last one just seems to be in there, I think, to make the Americans and Europeans feel happy. What do you make of those points? I think the expediting the procurement of emergency power point seems to be doing a lot of the work in here.
I think that, well, first of all, I take issue, Nicholas, when you said earlier that the government thinks that their the measures that they're going to take for the state of disaster, that's going to be based on science. During the COVID pandemic, when the state of disaster was implemented there, the measures that they implemented included, banning certain clothing. So I don't think I'm a bit worried about that comment from the government. Also, in terms of the other points that they've listed, the prioritization of security, I don't see how that's going to make any sort of a difference, really. I've actually read that people at Eskom have stated that deploying more soldiers to certain substations isn't going to make any sort of difference, because in cases the type of sabotage that happens at these substations, they include cable theft, coal being swapped when it's being transported, diesel being stolen. I don't see how people or soldiers who are trained in warfare could effectively deal with such issues. And then just another point from my side is that it just sounds like declaring a state of disaster is just dealing with a state-created problem by bringing in more state, or finding solutions by broadening the powers of the state. And I don't see how pushing for this state of disaster is going to make any difference, because the government already, they with the power that they had before that, and the resources that they had before that, all they ended up doing was implement measures that have brought us to this point where we are currently, stage 5 and stage 6 load shedding on a permanent basis. So all of these measures that they have listed, I think it's just paying lip service. And it makes the government look like they're going to do something effectively. But I don't think there's any. I don't think it's going to make any difference. Yeah,
it's a little bit like the arsonist burning down your house and saying, "Oh, whoops, terrible disaster, terrible, terrible, terrible." But don't worry, if you give me control of your finances, I'll be able to fix the problem really quickly. Which is not very encouraging. So, Sara, on this point here, they talk about firstly curbing the outward migration of technical and management skills at Eskom, or also mobilizing additional skills such as engineering. And this follows comments by Praveen Gordhan, which were made last year, I think, when he said to solidarity. We will look at your list of technical experts because we desperately need the help at Eskom. And then it's not really clear how much of that went forward. In fact, as far as we understand, Eskom's current equity and diversity plan involves getting rid of a lot of, and also according to Solidarity, for the next couple of years, involves getting rid of a lot of white maintenance workers. So once again, it really seems as though kind of ideology and politics are standing in the way of things here. I believe that after Gordhan said those things, that there were leaked comments from the head of HR at Eskom who basically said, we're not going to roll back transformation and bring back apartheid. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think they should roll back. They should stop rolling back transformation and worry about bringing back apartheid. Because if they don't, no emergency powers on earth are going to help them through this. I mean, they're talking about getting rid of 500 white maintenance workers by 2025. Now, first of all, that's not a lot of people in the overall scheme of the number of people, over 40,000 employed by Eskom. So I don't know why they feel so strongly about that. And the other thing is we have to, we're going to need all the skills we've got, and it doesn't matter where they come from, who they are, what color they are, whether they swing from the chandeliers. If they've got the skills, we need them, and they need to do what they've got to do. And also, with regard to the soldiers, I mean, the soldiers are never going to help unless you actually train the soldiers to look threatening and passively sit in a tank at a gate and know what it is they're looking for, and when they find it, they shoot the guys on sight. You really are wasting your time. You really, because the people who let, there's not. I wouldn't be remotely scared. Apparently, they saw soldiers sort of walk, sort of guarding the gate and eating the sandwiches, and I'd suggest, and much as I hate to say it, the Wagner Group or whatever they call it, if you really want to stop crime at Eskom, put them in, horrible as the thought may be. But it's really...
I suspect that would create a different set of problems.
It would indeed. But the very fact that they talk about needing the skills, but there's no reference to putting on hold any BEE programs, etc. Maybe they just don't want to say it out loud because it would offend the HR director at Eskom, but it goes without saying. The problem is, the one problem with the state of disaster is that Parliament loses oversight. And a state of disaster can just be kept being renewed ad infinitum, as we discovered with COVID. If you declared a state of emergency, then you still retain parliamentary oversight, and your ability to extend is not infinite by any stretch. So the state of disaster is, I don't know, I think it's a kind of, well, guys, we don't really know what to do, so let's be seen to be doing something dramatic because we've got a disaster of state.
Yeah, exactly. And what's striking to me about this whole plan is there's very much a case here of don't believe what the government says, believe what it's doing and does, because these two things are not even vaguely related to each other at this time. I'm happy to be proven wrong. If Fikile Mbulula wants to make me look like an idiot,
good luck to him.
I'd be very welcome, but I have my skepticism. All right, let's move on to our next topic. So the fencing company Clearview, I'm sure if you live in any of South Africa's big cities, you've probably seen their products at some point. Say that they have used a company called Statista to look into crime levels across Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, and have found that South Africa has some of the worst, if not the worst, crime on the continent, with, they say, cities like Pretoria, Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, and Bloemfontein being particularly bad. They looked at the crime rate of the 10 most populated cities in Africa, and they also say that they had a look at some of the most common crimes in each of these cities, saying that corruption and bribery is one of the most common crimes in South Africa, with assault and armed robbery being particularly bad in Pretoria, and that Durban had the most vandalism and theft crimes. So this was kind of reported in the news. It's obviously a bit of a marketing gimmick for the company because they're a fencing company. They're going to talk about how bad crime is. But Gerbrandt, you've looked quite a lot into the crime stats in South Africa. So what are your thoughts on these claims?
Yeah, so I think security companies could use this as a gimmick, to market their services. But I think there's a lot for them to use. Our crime is out of control. And what I also find interesting is that the annual crime statistics released by the SAPS, that came out last week. And they usually, when they do release these crime statistics, there would be a lot of fanfare or, media appearances by the police minister and, stating this is what the crime situation in the country looks like. But I didn't spot anything really in the media recently regarding the annual crime statistics. It's kind of like I just happened upon it yesterday on the SAPS website. And I think the reason, it just comes across as they're trying to sneakily, put it on the website and not draw a lot of attention to it. Because I've been looking at the statistics and they are horrific. So the annual crime statistics measures incidences of crime that were perpetrated between April 2021 to March 2022. So this is essentially after the worst of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown measures. So this is basically the first year that we can look at where crime trends are normalizing again after the lockdown measures were implemented. But what I found shocking was when we look at murder, for example. So pre-COVID in 2019, 2020, or 2020, 2019, there were around 21,000 murders in that year. That's pre-COVID. Then there was a dip in 2020, 2021, that period. That's because there were less opportunity to commit crime because of the lockdown measures. And then last year, there was normalization. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is in the last 5 years, the number of incidents of murder has been hovering around the 20,000 mark, a little bit lower, a little bit above. But the latest crime statistics show that around 25,000 murders have been committed. That is basically a 5,000 increase over a year. And if I remember correctly, my calculations showed that normally our murder rate will be 36 murders per 100,000 people. And that has risen to 42 murders per 100,000 people. So massive increase in violent crime. And as I've said on the show before, not a lot of crime is being reported to the police because people are just losing confidence in the police. But you can always look at murder as a trustworthy indicator of crime levels in the country because that has a 100% reporting rate. You have to report murder. And so it's just indicative that, crime in this country has, it's been out of control for a very long time, but it's just worsening to a different scale. And
right, it's like a return to the 90s.
Sorry?
It's like a return to the 90s.
Yeah. So, and I think it'll just get more worse under load shedding. I've been reading reports that it's going to just become effectively harder to combat crime now because your alarm systems, their batteries are being destroyed by the constant switching on and off of power between stage 5 and stage 6. Also, police response, if they do respond, they get held back because when the robots aren't working, you sit in traffic it's causing a lot of traffic problems. So that stops police from getting to a crime scene on time. And yeah, it's just, I think other security companies have also noted that there has been a substantial increase in house burglaries and house robberies during periods of load shedding. And so, yeah, I want to say same old, but it's not same old. This is a completely different picture that's emerging. So I definitely do think that the study from that private or that security company, it's partially a gimmick, but it's also pretty valid. And yeah, there's just no plan from the government to deal with it. I mean, people are making their own plans now. Households are making their own plans, which is why we've seen a mushrooming in the private security industry.
So, Sara, I'm a little bit fascinated with this question about how we relate to the rest of Africa when it comes to crime. So, of course, there's a lot of corruption across Africa, not a lot of very well-functioning states. But my mom, I would say about 5-10 years ago, went to Ghana to do some consulting. And while she was there, the Ghanaian said, "Aren't you terrified to live in that place? Isn't it like, how do you go outside of your house without being murdered?" The perception they had was that South Africa was this sort of war-torn hellscape full of just constant murders and terrible violence. Now, Ghana has a lot of problems, and I'd probably rather live here than there. But how is it that we came to a place where South Africa is so uniquely a violent society? Is it simply a function of our past? Is it something to do with, I don't know, inequality? Is it something to do with the police, the particular way in which the police react to crimes? Are they actually worse than in some other places on the continent? What's your theory? You're muted, Sara.
Sorry, I just wanted to keep sweeping out of the thing. I think it's a mix of things, and I think it is a past. It's also a capacity for violence. I think we spoke about it last week. Life is cheap, and you can pretty much get away with anything. Of course, I think the misconception is that the police should be solving crime, but they can't prevent crime from happening, except if they're successful in the prosecutions. If there are prosecutions following, then that will say that's a message that adds to the general opportunities to do something about crime. But crime is so much about what's happening in society, and as Kerry says, load shedding, no electricity, poor education, high unemployment rate. We have got them all. And just to add to the Ghana story, about just over a decade ago, I was on Israel on business. And very sweet waitress was serving us and asked where we came from. When I said Johannesburg, she said, "Oh my God, that place is so dangerous." So, the perception about us is, I think, has become unique and not entirely wrong. It's a range of things, and it's everything the government should be doing but isn't. It would help, of course, to have the police force properly run by the right sort of people, properly trained, disciplined properly, but that's such a huge task. But somebody's got to do it, and I think, and we'll see with the cabinet reshuffle if Becky Cele still remains on or not. But we have had increasingly bad police leadership, and it infuses everything we think about crime in this country, and I think that has to be addressed anyway. But there is no way the police can prevent crime. They by and large, not entirely, but by and large, respond to it. So the rest is about what South Africa is doing, what the government's doing or not achieving or failing at, and there's a lot of that.
No, it's crazy stuff, especially when you think, we've had police ministers like Fikile Mbalula and Becky Cele. Does not inspire confidence in one's soul. Okay, let me move on to the next topic. There's been some talk about NSFAS, which is, I think, the National Student Funding Association. I can't remember exactly what the full acronym. National Student Financial Aid Scheme. That's what it's called. This is a program that's been running since 1993. It started with around just over 83,000 students who it was supporting to get through university. And Higher Education Minister Bladen Nzimande says that government's aim is to increase the number of students receiving NSFAS aid up to 1 million. which is a number they're much closer to today. I think they've got about 900,000 or so students going through NSFAS at the moment. So there's going to be an increase, 7% increase in the number of students who are getting NSFAS aid. And apparently also for the first time, TVET colleges are going to receive an accommodation allowance of 54,000 Rand per year from NSFAS as well, if you qualify for a loan. So NSFAS is an interesting program. I've met quite a few people actually who would probably not have been able to go to university, but were able to go to it because of this program. But at the same time, you know, our universities are under a lot of strain. Our state finances are under a lot of strain. And I think the demand for university in general is far higher than it should be because of the poorness of our high school system, our matric system, which means that people want further education because otherwise they know they won't get a job. Gerbrandt, you've looked into education also quite a lot in your research. What's your take on this expansion of NSFAS further?
Well, I have big question marks around the sustainability of it and where the money is going to come from, because essentially the country is running out of money in every sort of sector and in every, you know, part of South African life. So that's the first question that I have, and the second statement that I actually want, or the statement that I want to make, is that you know, there is this idea that throwing more money at the problem will essentially fix things. And I think that was the idea with education, for example. And I know there's plenty of students and households that, you know, can't afford, you know, university life, higher education. But education has been the biggest expenditure item on the budget for a long time, if I have it correctly. And we are getting no bang for our buck. And I actually looked at you know, some of the comments that government officials have recently made, which was I think it was the spokesperson of Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga, who said that you know, we shouldn't compare private school, we shouldn't compare the outcomes of state schools with private schools, because private schools have smaller classes, they've got more resources. And yeah, so essentially, we shouldn't make that, we shouldn't compare the two. But the problem is that we have been throwing a lot of money to schools and the education sector, and we're just not getting anything out of it. And in fact, in many public schools, we are experiencing this phenomenon they call grade inflation. Where if a kid keeps on repeating the same grade over and over again, they just eventually push them forward, advance them to the next grade, so as to unclog the system a little bit. And that's apparently, that happens quite a lot in the public schooling sector. And then, of course, our very low pupil retention rate. We don't have a lot of children making it to matric, never mind writing matric. And then, of course, you know, the Basic Education Minister, Angie Motshekga, has been in a position since 2009. And so what I'm basically trying to say is that, first of all, I don't think throwing more money at the problem is going to fix anything. And second of all, I don't think the government has any plan to, or has any political will really to do something about, you know, schools and education. And I don't think there's any will to really fix things, which is, you know, horrific, because everything boils down to education. Every social ill that we have in this country is basically linked to poor education, poor school performances. So yeah, I don't know much how, I don't know if this NSFAS increases for students will make a huge difference, because I think the problems stem from primary school and high school. It goes back way further than just a lack of funding at universities.
Final thoughts?
No, just to say, everything from the NSFAS point of view has to depend around being very, very sort of careful about who you're giving funding to, that they have the sort of marks, to the extent that it can be determined, that they have a good chance of getting through university. We don't need lots of university students. It's a very niche, very elite environment. We need practical skills. And we have really largely stuffed up on that. That's a program in and of itself.
Well said. All right, and just to close off the episode, I just want to read something from Jacob Zuma with regards to Arthur Fraser, where Jacob Zuma said that he was very happy that Arthur Fraser had released him from jail on medical parole, and that Arthur Fraser should be applauded as an exemplary leadership that is required under our constitution. I am grateful for the medical parole decision. Without such an intervention, I may not be alive to depose this affidavit to the court. Zuma has said in a court proceeding, I think today. Something to think about. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. And I hope that you found the show interesting. We'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Fin Show.